Hi, I'm Greg from the band Terriginous, and next up, I am going to teach you Light Fuse and Getaway. If you like these videos, you like what you hear, make sure to check out Terriginous. All the relevant links are below. Of course, subscribe to our YouTube and enjoy. So, Light Fuse and Getaway, I think, is probably the toughest song on the record. There's some weird stuff, some tough stuff, and just a lot of different parts, abrupt tempo changes and stuff. So let's get right into it. The intro on the record, the guitar fades in the very beginning. Live, he hits the first hit with them, but this actually makes it easier to kind of like come in if you're wanting to play along with the record, and that's kind of part of the big goal of these videos, to get you just playing along with it. I usually just use the volume knob, fade in. Then the band hits the next downbeat. 1. We got a fairly straightforward riff here, but yet again we have the 2/16ths on different strings, which yet again, tilt your hand a little down and you should be able to do them pretty cleanly. We got a nice little F sharp and G dissonance there, some sus2 chords, followed by a riff just played in fifths. Pretty straightforward there. When I'm doing just eighth notes like that, nothing super fast, I'm not very strict about how I'm picking. If you want to be a stickler and alternate pick strictly, like a lot of things, it makes it a pretty good exercise, but it's not really necessary. You should be able to get that timing really nice. So that's the first line of the intro. The next line, of course, starts very similar riff in the beginning. Like we've discussed, these 3 power chords, 4 power chords rather, I'm putting over on the D string because it sounds bright, but you could certainly play them here. Easy either way. Of course, if you want to do a 3-string power chord on the D string, you end up with the standard shape plus pinky, or the octave is 1 fret higher than the 5th. Because of course the tuning of the guitar, where it's a major third between the G and the B, a perfect 4th with all the other strings. So so watch out here. This one I really end up, I'm really specific to count, because that chord hitting on beat 3 sounds a little awkward to me. So I always just give it a 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I know I'm coming in on the next line. Again, starting the same way. This is actually identical to the very beginning, but you don't have the power chord, you have the B's again. Just ending with the E flat sus2, and finally the last line of the very beginning. Same as the second line. Of course, if you see a chord vibratoed, that's almost always done with the whammy bar, especially an open string chord. Again, I'm counting that out. Then things start getting a little more interesting. We got a keyboard lead in the next part, and a part very reminiscent of the intro to Learning to Live, which is on the next record. But it's really all just power chords, or almost all power chords using open strings, the open E and B on top, or sus2 shapes. The first section, starting at measure 21, if you're following along with the transcription, the first section, some of the notes are muted, and then the end of the chord kind of rings out. First ending. And we have an alternating 4, 4, and 5, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1. You could count that measure of 5 sometimes as like 2 measures of 5/8, because it's like the 8th notes are broken up, the chords are broken up into half. But I like to keep the pulse the same. Writing them as 2 measures of 5/8 would mean usually that the pulse goes twice as fast for those, but it doesn't feel quite right. Now we get to the second ending. The second ending is still 5/4, but it's broken up a little bit differently. And in the second ending, so as you can see, the accenting is different, where the chord change is different. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, instead of like the two groups of 5/8 notes. So that section is fairly straightforward, getting stuff to ring. Now the next one on the record is a bit tough to make out because things get really ringy here. The keyboard lead is still going on. It's kind of like more a melody than anything else, but it's a little hard to discern how many notes he's hitting on the chord changes. So I tried to do something that makes like good right hand sense, but you can take it with a little grain of salt. Like he may be hitting the entire chord at the beginning every time, but I've sort of made my own rule out of it here. So he's starting with an E power chord. And then since you're hitting so many E's and B's, it's possible this is like shifted around a little bit, but it makes good hand sense to go like down, 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 up, up, and then you change to the D chord. Now that, you don't have time. He's only got a beat and a half to hit both the D power chord and the open E and B. So he's not arpeggiating the whole thing. There's not enough time here. So I have it as him hitting the chord and then just getting the two open strings on top, which is a very typical Petrucci kind of thing. He does it in Pull Me Under and a million other songs. So. So as you can see, similar thing, when he has enough time, I do think he's arpeggiating the entire chord, but when he doesn't, like on this F on 8th fret, I have that broken down to hitting the chord and then the individual notes. So all together, it sounds like this. There's your first half, and then the second half starts the same way. So an F down to a C sus2, he's not using the open strings there. For some of the chords, you can tell he's not using the open strings because it would just be a pretty gnarly sounding chord. Like on the E flat, it would sound pretty harsh, and the E flat sus2 makes sense. It's all sonorous. But if you, but on the C chord, it actually depends on, oh, I get it. So I didn't really ever look at the pattern here. I just transcribed it and moved on. So when it's part of the one, so this is a similar riff as the last one, but now we're in E instead of B. So when you're in E and he hits the C, it's a C sus2. When you're in B and it's a C, it's C major 7 because you're using the open E and B. Interesting guitar theory thing I probably won't go into that much, but it's like very Alice in Chainsy thing to move around a chord and have the top two open strings, and you get some neat chords out of it. What becomes Petrucci's favorite chord on, probably his favorite chord on Images and Words and on A Change of Seasons is F sharp 11, where you've got F sharp power chord and the open E and B on top. The E is adding the flat 7, which we need for an 11th chord, which is just an extension of a 7th chord of F sharp 7. So, and then you have the B, the 11 open. So if you're listening for it, you can hear it in a million different places. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, although he's doing something similar here. The second ending to this part in E is just like before, where now the accent, the chord changes are not halfway through the 5/4 measure. It's 2 and then 3 beats. Pretty much every time this riff comes back, it does that for the second ending. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, instead of 1 and 2 and 3 and where the changes. So I'll do that whole part in E. As I said, this is probably the trickiest song on the record, and I'm using the music a lot for this because the riffs are, these riffs come back and they're so super similar, but maybe not quite the same. And again, I want to do exactly what's on the record for you. It's very possible that he does this a little freer live with which strings he picks. Of course, the chord changes have to be in the right place because the whole band is changing those chords together. After that, you're going to go back to B. It's almost identical to the part we did before, but now there's just no palm mute, and he does have enough time to get every chord to ring. So there's he's not striking the entire chord except for in the first ending. Little anomaly there. So he hits a G, his favorite G5 right there. He may hit it once or twice, like once with the beat, or Of course, you have the chord change technically is still on 3N because he hits the low G there. So then the second time, watch out for that second ending, which has the different accent structure again. So just the second ending. And that leads you into a next part with clean guitar, but it is actually the same exact riff that we just did in E. Here, this is exactly why I keep looking at the music, because you can hear a little more clearly he's changing some of the open strings order, or at least that's what I'm making out here. And then the second time. And then there's a fermata on this one, and then the guitar comes in all by itself on one of the coolest riffs of the record, but it's almost like just snuck in there and it never comes back, but it's such a neat riff. Basically all playing on, playing in and around this E sus2. As I've already mentioned, one of Petrucci's favorite chords on the early records is sus2, sometimes played just as 3 strings with the stretch, but often when he wants the whole thing to ring, played as a bar chord. So, okay, what I'm calling the Rockin Riff here, because I do like it so much, I got like real in there to hear if he's always hitting the 3 strings, maybe he's only hitting the top of the chord. Live, it's probably also not as strict, but in the beginning, I'm not hearing him hit that E for just the very first time he hits the rest of the sus2. First and second time, rather. And it kind of tracks because so after the first 4 measures of the riff, the band hits with him, and then adding that low E in there, playing just a little bit more, I think just crescendos the music a tiny bit. So after the first 4 measures, like the fuller version of the riff. And again, another one where he very well may be doing a full sus2 like that, or sus2 with the 5th reinforced on the bottom here. This makes more sense to my hand because that just means he's moving this very shape back and forth, as opposed to that change of that. Could definitely be the other one, but yeah, it's pretty much going to sound exactly the same no matter what. I also don't hear the high 5th in there, which leads me to believe probably not the full bar chord. Probably the version that I have in the tablature. So then the riff kind of starts more in earnest because now it has a repeat. It's a little more predictable. So the next part. Also, take care on this line. So if you're following along with the transcription, we are on measure 50. Take care with this line because you'll notice he does the accents for the first measure and doesn't do as many accents for the third measure. But again, that's that riff, which leads us into what I'm calling the pre-verse, kind of the lead into the verse. Now here's where things get very interesting in terms of live. As I'm sure I've said in all the other videos, I used a performance from about 2004 to see a lot of what's happening because there's not a lot of footage of them playing it other than, and certain songs like Light Fuse and Get Away, I don't even know if they played it between then, between the back in the day when Charlie was singing for them and in 2004. But anyway, this riff is a lot different live. Instead of playing the your regular power chords, in root position on the neck here, he's doing, it's really just an E and F power chord. He's doing them all as 4ths here. Live, which kind of lends a nice growliness to it. But since we're doing the record version, I'm going up here. And that means these little in-between things are actually an octave lower. Live. But again, on the record, we're keeping it where it is. All right, so it's a really straight up E Phrygian riff here. Right, minor Aeolian flat 2, minor scale, just with a half step in the beginning. But nothing outrageously weird here. I'm putting that initial E power chord as with the high open E in B2 because it really gives it a nice brightness and jumps out. That's what I'm hearing on the record. Does he hit it without it? He might. That sounds better to me. Yep, and there's no strange fingering here. Everything pretty much makes sense. For the single note stuff, I'm just moving up the fret. So not rocket science on that part. Now the verse on the record is also different than live. Live, it's a little simpler, but on the record, keep in mind that these rhythm guitar parts are always doubled right and left. So you can tell nothing's a mistake or like just off the cuff because he's doing it on both tracks. He's kind of sneaking in a couple sixteenths in somewhat unpredictable places. So again, following from my transcription, it's pretty obvious where they are. At the beginning of the verse, it's on beat 1 of the first measure, on beat 2 of the second measure. And you can see we have the same lick from before, but now down the octave. Second half. Little variation on that riff instead of, but very similar. Now he kind of sneaks an accent in there too, again on the record originally. So the next line of the verse. And the last group has a 4/16. A little tough to make out on the record because when a lot of times in Dream Theater when there's some kind of like rhythmic accent like that or a little rhythmic jump in there, Portnoy will match it a lot on drums, but he doesn't seem to do that here, which might be why they just dropped that live. So then you get to the first ending of the verse where we're doing this descending power chord bit. So it's really just arpeggiating power chords and going down. So just watch out for where you are. He doesn't do the 3-note power chord on the first one. He goes instead of just a little variation that he never does again. So that's pretty straightforward. Just we're taking that power chord shape, moving it down. Just watch the music, and like anything else, practice it slow until you have the phrasing exactly right. I'm not strictly alternate picking here. I'm just doing whatever's convenient. It's not crazy fast. Then we get to a part where the whole band is doing these hits together. This is a good example of something where you could be like, oh, this is on 1E, this is on the and, or blah, blah, blah. It's just easier to kind of think of it as pieces and space in between. So it's a piece of 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, and then the 3 without so much of a space in between. So that's pretty straightforward. And then we've got another power chord deal, but this time going in the other direction. And then we have this neat little arpeggio, this F thing. F sus2. Which is F sus2 add sharp 11, if you want to be technical, if you want to call everything in there a note, but it's a very, very Phrygian riff the way it leads back to E, because we're kind of accentuating the F chord and going right back to E for the repeat. Also not super fast, so nothing crazy technique-wise here. That leads you back to the verse. So back to the beginning of verse 1, where I already discussed everything, so we're going to do that exactly the same, but hopefully your notation reading is good enough and you're paying attention to the fact that there's a second ending here. So the second ending takes off right where that power chord bit began, and it starts just a little bit different. It's just notes in a little bit of a different order. This makes sense for why he in the first one he's going, and in the second one, that kind of sets off the whole thing to be a little bit different. And then we're back to another part where the whole band da 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 da. But now you'll notice that the accents are flipped. On some of them, Portnoy does it with the guitar. On the other ones, he's doing it kind of opposite. I forget which is which, but just hold your own on this rhythm. But same thing. Group of 1, group of 3, group of 1, group of 3, group of 1, group of 3, group of 2 that are really the pickup into the next power chord arpeggio part. Right? So, and then you got your arpeggio part here. but now we're ending differently because this is going to lead us into the chorus, which is a key change. On the end of the first ending, we did this F sus2 thing to lead us back into E. But here, we're going to do an A flat sus2 thing to lead us into the chorus, which is in G minor instead of E minor. So nothing too crazy here, although you're lower on the fretboard, so we got to be able to make that stretch. And then because of the tuning of the guitar, it's not exactly the same lick. You got to reach down for this pull off here from 7 to 3. And then so everything else is the same, of course, except for those two notes appearing one fret over, because we're not involving the B string on that lick. Now we are on the chorus. I was playing as 3-note power chords. I wrote it as 2. This might be one where there's good footage where you can see Petrucci. A lot of times when he's playing power chords and moving around more, he'll actually use pinky on the other note, which I'm sure I mentioned in one of the other videos. I never really like doing that because I don't like how it kind of puts your hand in a squishy position, not ready for other things. But I was actually playing this as 3-note power chords, but 2 is good enough. And then this little G minor lick. Same thing, I'm not being really strict with picking. If you want to be, then start on an upstroke. This way, you'll hit a downstroke on the downbeat of the next measure. Got our A flat sus2 there, and then some fourths to do a C power chord and a B flat power chord inverted. Little pentatonic lick. I'm doing 3 notes on this power chord. Doesn't really matter. And then E flat sus2. And I gotta admit, I don't see Petrucci doing E flat sus2 down here all that much. Oh, the sus2 shapes with the D shape. He's almost always using the A shape. But to me, this makes a lot more sense since we're on the 3rd fret there. So here's our whole chorus. So, unlike a lot of other Dream Theater tunes, every time the chorus comes back, it is the exact same riff. The only difference is the last chorus is 4 times instead of just 2. So pretty straightforward here. That leads us right after the chorus into something I'm calling the Proto Liquid Tension Experiment riff, because it reminds me a little bit of, oh man, I think it might be on the first Liquid Tension record. I don't even know the riff very well. Definitely more of a Dream Theater fan than Liquid Tension, although it's all great. So yeah, it's a similar thing where we're pulling off on the G and the D and G strings, and so all works out pretty well. Just stay in 3rd position. Pointer and ring get most of it. For at the end, there's this little. So this little G blues thing where we're adding the flat 5 here. So yeah, you could make an exercise at a ring and pinky to do this. That's all well and good, but you know what? I'm just going to move my hand. I know I can do it more strictly and reliably by moving my hand. You got all those open strings, which the open string right beforehand rather, which gives you plenty of time to move your hand. Watch out, because you got a really super abrupt tempo change here where we're diving into 16th notes. It's nothing difficult, but it's tricky to like nail this right on and get your timing perfect when you're coming in. We got like the power metal polka beat on the drums. So listen to that snare, make sure that's on your upbeats comfortably. And we have verse 2, which in my mind is a very, very Megadeth-y riff. We got a lot of these nice little chromatic bits in there. So just 16ths on the E, and then your chromatic from C. And then a little callback to verse 1 with that which is pretty cool. And then the second time, same exact thing to start. And of course that chromatic starts right on beat 3, starts on a downbeat, so no funky counting or nothing interesting picking either. Everything is just strictly alternate picked, changes it on the down. Jump to the second ending though. The second ending has you doing a chromatic bit that starts higher, which musically makes a lot of sense because we're starting the chromatic bit a whole step higher, slightly different rhythm to it. It's taking up a whole measure now. But that's also going to lead us to another key change of F sharp. The key changes are really short. I did not work them into the transcription. I just still have this written as E minor for now until the chorus, which of course changes back to G minor. But yeah, power tab gets a little funny if I put in too many key changes. So that's one of the reasons I don't do it. So, so anyway, yeah, we got that second ending. Now watch out for your rhythm here. 1 and 2 E enda, 3 and 4 E enda. Make sure you down pick your 8th notes and then alternate pick all your 16ths. Down, 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 up, down, up, down, 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 up, down, up. Which leads you into the next part of the verse. Really the same exact thing, but with the hammer on from E to F sharp in the beginning, in the downbeat 1 and 3. Then that goes into, I didn't call this part a pre-chorus, but I very easily could have called it like a pre-chorus riff. So remember how we had those descending power chord arpeggios before? So now we just have a diminished fifth shape moving across the strings. Pretty straightforward idea here. This is one of those where at first hearing it, I was like, that sounds pretty random. And then I finally worked that on guitar. I was like, oh, I bet anything this was written on guitar and not keyboard because it's such a guitar-friendly kind of thing. A half step up for the last shape. And then instead of going down low for this next part, you have what looks like a power chord, but of course, because we're on the B and the G string, this is the diminished fifth. Now, again, just pay attention to your groups. 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1. And really the same exact thing there. A little bit of a slide off, which takes you to chorus 2. Chorus 2 I'm not going to talk about because we've already done it. It's exactly the same. Then you get to the interlude. So the interlude is done, can be done with volume swells. This guitar, I have one of those volume knobs. I don't remember if we've done this yet on this record, but on this particular guitar, I have one of those volume knobs that's a little tougher to turn. So if you have an easier volume knob, this part's a lot easier. So they make them some gummier than others. So, because it's tougher to turn, I'm just going to use hammer-ons. But like on my Stratocaster, for example, not the best pickups for this kind of stuff, but on my Strat, it's got a really easy volume knob and the volume knob is super close. So on that, it's easier to actually pick and use the volume knob. But here, again, it's a little difficult. So I'll use hammer-ons to free up my right hand a little bit. And it's just really a little, you can think of it as G minor or C minor, but everything's kind of going back home to G minor. Then the keys solo starts, and you got a little bit of clean guitar. Now the next 2 lines of music are very hard to make out on the record. So if you're looking at me like, I don't hear that at all, the keys lead is loud, and I think there's also keyboard chords going on, which are totally outshining the guitar. But you have essentially G minor 11. You got your minor third, you got your minor or flat 7, and you got your 4 or 11 in there. Going back to 4, 5, 1, so that's not changing the name of the chord at all for that second half. Then we got a B flat major 7, add sharp 11 with the open E string on top. Then we got what I like to call the jazz cat fingering of D minor 7, where you've got the root with your middle finger. You're killing the A string and just mashing down your ring finger on strings 4, 3, 2 for your flat 7, flat 3, and 5. The next measure that changes, your 5 goes down to 4, but since the 5 is optional in a jazz chord, you're going to end up with D minor 11 after that. So D minor 7, D minor 11, and then the next one, even though G is your bass note here, I'm pretty sure the keys are playing C, so you end up getting C7 sus to C7. This is a bit of a tricky one because we have a big stretch here. For you Alan Holdsworth fans that have stumbled upon this video, I'm not trying to get in your territory. This is nothing like some of those Holdsworth chords, but for us mere mortals, this can be a little tricky to reach. Especially to get that open E on top. But what's going on? Why is this a C7, C sus to C7? The C is in this chord actually. Right here, and you've got G, which is your 5, B flat, which is your flat 7, C, which is your root, and you got F on top, which is your 4, C7 sus or C7 sus 4, and then of course that note resolving down to E gives you a very interestingly shaped C7. That leads you to the whole band kind of takes it up a notch, and the rhythm guitar part is even more difficult to hear in this part. It's like whisper quiet on the record, but it is distortion and it's pretty simple. I'm doing the best I can in terms of the rhythm here. I think it's just kind of strummy and easy. So we start with our G5, the John Petrucci's favorite. When I'm playing some of these jazzier chords with distortion, sometimes I'll add a little less. So in B flat major 7, I might not add that 5th on top. And D minor 7, jazz cat fingering. Those, they are in there on the guitar again, really, really super whisper quiet. And then for the last 2 measures, he's strumming away at these chords. So it's basically impossible to hear, but musically, theory-wise, it works perfectly with what's going on here. So just a C bar chord. Put your pinky down for C sus 4 and back to C. Then we get to the solo. So this solo is also one of Petrucci's harder ones, but not because he's doing anything physically wild. This is another one where it's kind of like, and again, there's a lot of that on this record where it's like, well, this is the idea of what he's doing. You could do little variations or your own thing, and he does the same thing. He'll be, when he plays it live, he'll be in that certain section, but the lick might be a tiny bit actually different because it's just kind of shreddy and quick. So starting off though, we got a pretty nice predictable riff in the beginning. Make sure you grab your bar as you do this first phrase, and don't let go of it until you are on the second line, till the second measure, the second line of the solo, right? So here we go. Apologies for the slightly bad page turn here, but that's how it is. So we're starting off with actually a pretty standard blues riff in G minor. Nothing crazy here. This next riff, however, is a little deceptively difficult because we've got 2 of what I like to call the change-up. The change-up is, so if you've got your minor pentatonic scale, yeah, you can just go up and down. There's only so much you're going to get. There's only so many phrases you can get by always going pointer, ring, pointer, pinky, pointer, ring, pointer, and going back and forth between those 2. So what a lot of guitar players do, like I said, they might have a riff that consists of a lot of that, but then do what I call the change-up, where they're actually going to bar, because that works so nicely in this first pattern of your minor pentatonic. That's a really common one. I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but that's one thing that if you pick apart Slash from Guns N' Roses, if you pick apart his solos, he'll have these pretty fast pentatonic-y licks with that change-up snuck in there just to make it a little bit different, so it's not so boring as like, you know. So that kind of stuff is in there. So So there's a change up in the second measure where he's going. And the thing about the change up is you always have to plan ahead because you're going to need to bar when you get to it. So I'll do the first two measures here. I find the more awkward one is when you have to go from F to C. And of course, this is why you want to still be holding the whammy bar, because after he does that slide from C to B flat, he does a really quick dive and lets it up slow. Now, you'll also notice I have a couple parentheses notes here. So in the beginning of the next measure, that one is just, I mean, he was going, probably just kind of letting go of the note and moving his hand up as he goes to the next part of the riff. This is one of those that's a little bit like spacey in terms of timing, but you get the right amount of notes, they'll actually fit in pretty well. And again, using a lot of whammy bar here to kind of make it sound, give it that kind of wacky whammy bar-y sound, right? I have two pulling back here. You could interpret that as just a vibrato. But anyway, that's a pretty straightforward riff if it's a little spacey, because the fingering actually is really hand friendly. Pointer finger on 9. You're going to end up sliding pinky from 12 to 14. Middle finger's right there for 11. Slide up to 14. Hammer on pull off, and your hand is actually right there. So you're kind of evolving through three little positions here. 9th position. Briefly 11th position, just for pinky and middle to get 14 and 12. Then sliding up to 14th position. And the next part had me confounded for a little bit, but pretty sure I got it. I think he's doing one of these like slide there and back again, and he's doing it a little higher every time, although he's probably not being terribly strict. Since this is over the D minor 7 chord, he's basically treating this part like it's in D minor. And kind of fooling with D major a little bit. So it's a very like blues kind of oriented riff here, because he's starting on F sharp, essentially doing a D major arpeggio. But the high note isn't super important here. He's going to it quick, coming back down, and he goes higher every time. And again, the timing is, you'll notice 30-second notes and grace notes in here. We're just kind of trying to squeeze that in, and I'll show you what to watch out for to get this part exactly right and make it line up correctly. So keep in mind, we're also starting this on beat 4, because we came from that. 4. So what you want to do here is make sure that beat 4, you got this whole little lick, and then beat 1 and 2, you're rather mostly like at the end of that beat and the beginning of the next beat, you're kind of squeezing in the next 2. It's 3 shapes, 3 like little slidey arpeggios. If you're really trying to be strict about this, sounds like he's sliding to 17th fret, or A, B flat on 18, and then B on 19. So, and then always coming back down and doing a pull off. And one good way to do this, again, if you're really trying to be strict about it, is actually stare at your destination fret, the one you're sliding up to. If you're staring right at it, more times than not, your hand is going to automatically stop there. Clearly an evolution for playing guitar. So after you've done that, then there's one of those licks on 2nd string, but he's hitting the C natural here. So it's like an A minor arpeggio. Now, if you've squeezed that in fast enough, then finally at the end of that, and I didn't use any marker to denote a different phrase, but this A on 10th fret hammer on to 12 is really a pickup into beat 3, and that's what you want to target here to get it on time. There's a lot of times in a solo when I'll have this like kind of, oh, there's just a lot of notes in here. How do I know when to start and stop? You want to have really specific targets, especially if you're going into a much more predictable, sensible riff than what you came from. So we came from this kind of crazy thing where we're just kind of like trying to squeeze those slides in there. Then once we get to this much more sensible bluesy riff, sensible, like we can make sense out of it. That is all pretty normal. You've got like a Dorian pentatonic blues riff. But the important thing is that that C, da-da-da, lands right on beat 3. Then after that bend, the pull-off gets you to the beginning of the next measure, and then things should be pretty easy to feel at that point. So 1, 2. So that's pretty straightforward riff. You end right on beat 4, so that'll take you into the next one. The next lick is another, so you see I have this written as sextuplets, so yeah, these are probably sensibly felt, but at this tempo, we're really just trying to squeeze these notes in really fast. So I'm gonna do Marty Friedman picking here. Petrucci may actually be going like down, pull off, down, down, but I really like starting this with an upstroke, like, so that Marty Friedman style picking. So I'm gonna go up, up, pull off, down, down. We got A minor followed by C, or you can think of the whole thing as A minor 7, right? And then we're ending on a, is it a D minor? Yes, it is. And so that makes sense. We got A minor 7 to D as arpeggios, basically. But other than it being very fast, there's really no other trick to it. Just watch out, if you are Marty Friedman picking it like me, you don't over up pick a little bit, hit the 3rd string by accident. This is one thing I tend to do if I'm not being careful. That takes you through a whole measure. Make sure you count. The bass and drums introduce a cool little lick here. So you're just basically listening, hanging out for one full measure, which seems like an eternity sometimes when you're playing a solo. Then you have another one of Petrucci's favorite licks to do on this record, which is the moving fifths down the 1st and 2nd string. I think there's 3 or 4 solos where he does it this way. So we're just sliding up, and we're essentially, our overall key is still G minor, right? So we're essentially going to be doing like this G Dorian thing, G bluesy thing, and end up finally on G. So this is a really cool extended lick, and this is one of the ones to play exactly the way it's on the record. So what's happening here? He's sliding into it to begin, but he's starting with a power chord, another power chord, but because it's G Dorian, he's hitting E natural on the way down, and we wouldn't want to hit a B natural because that would take away our Dorian flavor, so it's E to B flat. You end up, of course, with the diminished 5th interval right there. Then we're back to normal power chord again. Now he's going to introduce a little chromatic stuff to the lower line, and then keep the high line diatonic, meaning keeping the notes on the 1st string still in the same key. And then the beginning of your 2nd measure, this is one thing where it gets a little tricky to practice to play it fast, but if you play it slow, you can program this into your head. If you're really feeling the beginning of this next measure, give it a triplet, right? So we've got 1 full measure of 16th notes, pretty straightforward. Now at the beginning of the next measure, make sure to give that, like I said, a very defined triplet feel. And now this all works out really well for the hand. So after you do your triplet, so bend on C on 13, and then that slide is what's going to make the next part of the riff very doable. So we just kind of finished going down the G minor scale there. The little slide off is to reposition your hand and end with this nice pentatonic-y bluesy lick. So starting from the beginning of that measure, and similar to that last crazy phrase that we had, where we were going from the one where I said make sure you have your target. You're ending that whole bit on the D on the downbeat of 4. Very similar, you're ending this whole bit on the downbeat of 4 with a G. So again, that's kind of your overall target here, but not that we have a crazy randomish kind of riff beforehand. We have a very predictable riff. So make sure you start with the triplet. And that gets you through that riff. So very, very cool part, starting with our fifths on the first 2 strings, occasional diminished fifth interval, and then with that nice little blues run at the end. That leads you into the next parts. Now we are gonna get into somewhat randomish territory. However, if you're paying attention, theory-wise, this is just really down our G Dorian scale. So, so along those lines. So we're starting with sliding up to 17 here. And think of these as all little 3-note bits. If I'm playing something very fast, I like to think of almost like a piano player. If I were playing 3 notes at the same time, making a little clustery chord, if I had to play F, G, and A at the same time, what would my fingers do? Well, of course, they'd be all in the same notes. So this is a good way to think about it as you're diving into a lick like this, because then everything's going to be close. And it's all about efficiency to play something really fast like this. So I'm thinking about the clusters of notes I have here. So I'll just go by fret number, 13, 15, 17. There is a 16 snuck in there. It may be a mistake, or he maybe wanted to get the A flat in there. I don't know, probably a mistake, being that ultimately we're G Dorian. As you might be thinking about it as like a D blues thing. The G Dorian scale is the same as the D minor scale, so a lot of crossover there. So depends just how you think about it. A little bit of an aside, oftentimes I might use the same exact scale, but just think about it differently, because it's going to cause me to phrase things differently. Change it up, make it interesting. All right, so okay, so we got our clusters of 3 notes here, 13, 15, 17, maybe 16, maybe a mistake, who knows. Slides down to 12, but there's a little like chromatic business here where he's eventually making it to 10. It seems to me like his destination's 10. He might have a little like extra thing in there, but again, this is the kind of stuff that's so fast and sort of flaily. As long as you're getting clean notes out of it, a lot of what you do is going to sound cool. Once you've gotten there, then you move over to the second string and you're in perfect position for it. Kind of back and forth on it a little bit, but 10, 11, 13. A, B flat, C. So far. Then you're going to move over to the third string, and here's where things get a little dicey and a little weird, but essentially, he's putting a little chromatic stuff to go downward. Also, one thing I did not mention about this solo is there is a ton of delay on it. So this part's really hard to pick out. As he goes lower in register, the delay kind of like masks what exactly he's doing. So take a lot of this with a grain of salt, but I think I'm pretty damn close. So here we're going to start putting licks. We've already done 10, 11, 13 on the second string with our flaily licks. Now we end up over on the third string. So where he's really just using 3-note groups to descend. His goal is B flat, the third of the key we're in, right? So you can totally get away with a lot of those kind of like 3-note licks descending 1 or 2 frets as you go. So because he ends up hitting almost everything chromatic, I'm sure this isn't a very strict thing as much as just getting his fingers moving, going all the way down to descend on 3rd fret. If you want to stick strictly to the Dorian scale, we would be doing 12, 10, 9, 7, 5, 3. But you see he hits the 4, he hits the major 3rd in there. I believe he hits the flat 7 on 8. Yeah, so I don't think he's being strict about that. So this whole flaily lick coming together. Or let me see, is there anything predictable about this? He's probably, it sounds like he's maybe alternating middle and ring as he's descending. In terms of the higher note, but index finger is really his guide down the string. Again, you have a note that landed, oh, actually you had, that note landed right on beat 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That 5 is not very meaningful. That 5 that I have sliding up, that's just your beat 4 getting into position. And then you have the kind of lick that Petrucci really likes to do a lot. It's in, I think, Under a Glass Moon. He has a really, really similar riff. I could have written this one with tremolo picking like I did some of the earlier solos, but instead I tried to get every note in here. But again, as you're looking at this, you're going to be like, this is kind of random, like how many notes he's hitting on each string, sort of. So is it, I mean, is he being strict? 4 notes. Well, this is just based on the E minor pentatonic scale, right? But to make it sound shreddier, he's adding some chromatic notes in here, and he's picking a lot faster than his left hand is moving, and that's where we're getting double notes for 30 seconds. But again, there's also a ton of delay on this. It's pretty hard to pick out, but I'm confident that I have you doing the right kind of thing in the right kind of place. So that's essentially what it's going to sound like. I may have missed one chromatic in there, but we're basically going up the blues scale. I definitely would do the chromatic on the 6. It sounds like a strong, confident beginning. Oh, that's right. And then, of course, ending on that bend. There is a pattern. The most important pattern to follow here, if you're picking it pretty quick, is how is he changing strings? And that's a very predictable pattern. He's starting on 6th string, going 3 strings up, and then back, and then 3 strings up. So when he gets to the 3rd string going backwards, he doesn't ever get to the 1st string until the bend. A bend on 18th fret. And again, the important note, the one that he's holding at the end, is just squarely in G minor pentatonic, so it's all going to work. Finally, the end of this solo. So we've done that crazy lick, came off on that bend. Now we're going to do what I like to call the country lick. I am not much of a country guitar player, but this always sounded very country to me. Slash, of course, loves doing this. A lot of classic rock players do this until the cows come home. Pete Townsend loves this lick too. So that's where you take notes a fourth apart. Very often at this point in this very pattern of the minor pentatonic, the 3rd string ring finger, second string pinky. A lot of guitar players don't like using their pinky, so they'll do it this way, but I like pinky, especially something like this where my fingers line up and I needed to do some chromatic stuff. So, and that's just where you play both strings, bend the lower one. Oftentimes you're bending a whole step, you're turning the perfect 4th into a minor 3rd. But here we have the added bonus of using the whammy bar. So on the and of 4, he's going to bend the lower note. He hits the 2nd string. I think does a really quick whammy bar dive. Then bends again and does like a lot of hamming on the whammy bar here. Then at the end of that measure, he's going to do 2 of these. It's a pretty sweet 80s trick to do. So if you do, I don't think we've done this yet on this record. We are going to do it in Afterlife as well. But where if you depress the bar, your right hand is busy depressing that bar. But you can get a harmonic with left hand by flicking with your index and putting either middle or ring. I think ring's a lot easier. Putting ring finger over the desired harmonic space. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm depressing the string, which might, depending on how your guitar is set up, might make the string pop out a little bit, and that actually makes it a little bit easier. But I'm going to flick it with my index finger, at the same time have ring finger over the 4th fret, and if I've done it correct, I get a harmonic. So a lot of times when you hear wow, that sound, you're hearing the noise of that really depressed 3rd string, and very often, I've talked about this before, a lot of times this action is happening on the 3rd string because it's the loosest one on the guitar, which means it's going to do the wackiest stuff when you're using the whammy bar. So the next one, it's actually a little hard to discern which harmonic the next one is because it's really high. And of course, since you're using the whammy bar, whatever the initial pitch might be, he ends up pulling it back a bit and then going down. I have it written as a bend. Of course, we can't bend a natural harmonic in the traditional sense. But so I'm going to do it on 4, and then the next one, I think I'm going to put it on. I'm going to try like 2.6. The one there is a pretty high, gnarly harmonic. It is the flat 7 plus 2, 3 octaves. That's the end of the solo. that leads us right back into chorus 3. On the record, that whammy bar part keeps going over the chorus, but I've kind of had enough of those shenanigans by this point in the song, and I'm getting right back into the chorus. Same thing as before. Pretty straightforward thing, we already talked about that, but keep in mind this is going to now happen 4 times instead of 2. No big deal. The next part is the keys lead again, and this is essentially identical to what we did in the beginning, just the first 2 parts. 1 time in B with the palm mute, and then 1 time in E. So I'm not going to go over that again. We've already done a lot of that, but here's the part where you're really going to sweat. This is one of the most difficult things on the record, and interestingly, the performance in 2004, Petrucci is not playing anything like this. Well, maybe it's a little bit like it, but he's definitely playing something different than on the record. In addition, this is also very buried on the record. Really, really hard to pick this out. It's just kind of a wacky, crazy guitar thing, and I think it's possible if this is one of those songs that they didn't play for 20 years, maybe he just went and rewrote something that sort of follows the arpeggios a little better. We're still dealing with the same thing. It's that over that same riff in B, I believe, where we're alternating between 4/4 and 5/4. However, now we've really got our work cut out for us here. But it's such a cool riff. I really wish it were louder on the record because it is a cool but very, very difficult thing. So set your metronome to a lot less than 156. This isn't too bad at a slower speed, but it definitely starts getting hairy. Also, we're dealing with triplets. If we're dealing with triplets, that makes our alternate picking a little weird because every other beat's going to start with an upstroke, right? However, we also have a measure of 5/4. So if we don't somehow correct for it, the picking is going to get really, really weird. I don't hear a pull-off in a certain place on this, but if you put a pull-off somewhere, it will help a lot. I'll show you what I mean. So the first measure, that I'm pretty confident about. We got the pull-off to B. But even though we have a pull-off, I'm keeping my alternate picking correct. Well, am I actually? No, I'm not. I'm using that pull-off to correct my picking there. This way, I'll start the next measure with an upstroke, but I'll start the third measure with a downstroke, so then I'll be correct, right? So we've got kind of this B minor 7 arpeggio to begin with, but you don't want to bar it because you need index finger ready here. And this part might be the same in the 2004 performance. It's been a little while since I watched it and transcribed this, but anyway, so we don't want to bar because that 6th fret is coming up. So pointer, pinky, middle. All right, and then we got E on the B string. Down, pull off, up. It was going to help the picking for the next bit. Little F sharp minor arpeggio stuck in there. Or if you still want to count B as the root of this thing, you're just doing the 7 and the flat 7 and the 9. 5 flat 7 9. Right. Then we move over to the C chord. So I'm using my ring finger to bar the 10s here because we really got to pick and choose what the best fingering is here, and it's gonna be tough. There's no way around it. So the key here is, well, it's just difficult. There's no way around it. So ring finger bar, 9/7/9 pointer middle finger. Really, it all is in service so that when you get to the B flat sus2, you're in a comfortable place for it. Then after that, then your last triplet is up there on 10th fret. I am barring this one, so I'm barring here this power chord again because pointer and middle is going to get here, all eventually in service to getting here without too much of a fuss. At 156, it's hard to do this, but another way around this odd picking is to do 2 very quick downstrokes to kind of correct yourself. I think I'm actually starting this measure with a downstroke, so if I start with an up. There we go. Yeah, then I've ended with an up. Now I've gotten to this part. This mimics the beginning, but it's an octave higher, so of course you're on different strings. The B string's involved, so the fingering gets a little weird. So some of this is the same actually now that I'm remembering it, but it's not all exactly the same. This, taka taka, these 16th notes snuck into the triplets is the same. Every now and then you may have come across in your guitar lives that you have this little quirk. Something doesn't want to work right for whatever stupid reason. A lot of times it's not something particularly hard. Your brain just doesn't want to do it for whatever reason. It happens to all of us. And I have a part like this right here. My pinky doesn't want to go to second string right here. So this is exactly the kind of lick that I'll take and I'll break down. And be really conscious about that. And I've done a million licks like that before, but for some reason in this context, that's the part where I'm most likely to do something kind of weird. But the nice thing about this one measure, however, is that it is all in the same place. Unlike the very beginning where you have to kind of move over and do that different position to get 6th fret, everything is comfortably in 9th position. And then, of course, watch out for those 16 notes. Da 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 da. And then, so the first ending, I'm barring here to get this C major 7. Doing this little 3-note lick on first string. Now you might be thinking, oh, we had B on the second string. Why not play that C on the second string as well? Because man, that would make the fingering even more awkward than it is here. So I'm almost treating things like 3 little microcosms, and that makes them easy to pick apart. Then you have, this is not too bad for left hand, but this is really a tricky pick thing. Also, sometimes I'll hammer on this last note to give my pick the opportunity to start with a downstroke on the repeat. So, so the first half of this measure, right, and the second half, it's mostly comfortably in 10th position. So again, left hand not too bad. I got no advice other than to do it slow and practice just your alternate picking being accurate to strings. So I've been playing it fast, so now slowing it down messes up my thing. So, yep. For right hand, it's slow enough where you can put a little bounciness in, and that actually will help you change strings. I've talked about before, if you're doing something blazing crazy fast with alternate picking, you just don't have the opportunity to put any bounce in there. It is slow enough, triplets at 156, to put that tiny bit of bounce in there. Of course, we repeat, and everything's the same, until the second ending. When you go to the second ending, it starts the same way. First 2 triplets are the same. And then we're gonna have this nice mighty D power chord arpeggio with an E and G sharp at the end of it. So this stretch isn't too bad this high in the fretboard. And then the very end may actually be a mistake on the record, but what the hell, he's playing open G, 12th fret on D, 7th fret on the A string. And that actually puts your hand in the perfect place for the ending of the song. So just that last measure. That brings you to the outro, or the ending. And thankfully, ending's pretty easy. Just keep track of your beats here. 3, 1, then 2, and 3. One of the things you may notice if you're playing along with it is some of these chords actually sound a little wrong. The bass is actually hitting different notes on some of these, and it's actually changing the chord, which is cool because just by changing that bass note kind of pulls your ear towards something else. But if you isolate the right and left guitar, you actually pretty clearly hear just these chords. So power chords and sus2s, totally normal John Petrucci stuff, nothing crazy. Second time. And of course, ending with Petrucci's favorite G5. So pat yourself on the back. I think this is the toughest song on the record because of all the different parts and that really wild part with the triplets. So stick around. Coming up next is Afterlife.